we're really excited, and thank you so much for coming in person, for coming online to celebrate Professor Fung. This is a real rite of passage in the university community and a cause for great celebration and joy. Particularly is that it's our first round. It's the only thing that is less than optimal. Kenneth has been an integral part of the UHN community right from residency days on, but his heart is truly at the Western. And so we really tried to have this celebration at the Western, but some of you who are affiliated with us know there's a new project called Aspire. So I thought that was sort of, you aspire for many things. So I thought there was some alignment there, but where we're building a big surgical tower. And so all of the meeting room space has been just evaporated. So that's why we're meeting here. And it's, I know the general's very second rate, but you know, we're welcoming you here.
I'm not worthy.
You're not worthy. Just so that people understand how sort of things roll. So I'm going to introduce Benoit Malsant in a moment. He is the chair of our department, and he will introduce Kenneth and talk about all of his accolades and why he was promoted. Kenneth will then have an opportunity to really talk about his career and reflect on that. And then when it's over, in contrast to other rounds where everybody gets to put up their hand and ask difficult questions, we don't do that here. We don't do that. But what we do is have anyone who wants to be able to say some words of tribute or thanks to Kenneth gets the opportunity to do so. Unfortunately, dear colleagues online, we have tried very hard to make this work. In the olden days, so like 2 years ago with COVID, it was all online, and so everybody could only, everybody could speak and write and do their thing. The only people that can speak are the ones in this room. So at the end, I'll offer the opportunity for people to come up who want to say something. But I would encourage the folks who are online, and also any of you in the room who want to join the Zoom for a moment, to leave a tribute to Kenneth, because then the department prints it all off and presents it to him. So that, and then we get our box little cake. So that's so exciting. So I'm going to start by introducing Dr. Benoit Malsant. Some of you will know Benoit, some of you won't. He is the Labatt Family Chair Professor of Psychiatry for the University of Toronto. He is our academic chair and chief, and he is always wonderful at these events in talking about all of the academic achievements that warrant full professorship. So Professor Fung, we're very proud of you. We're very happy for you. And come on up, Benoit.
Thank you very much for your introduction. And I want to echo Susan. Welcome to all of you who are in the room. And there are more than 300 people who have registered online. And I think we have a couple hundred who are now online. And every time somebody joins in this room, we are ding ding. So there's 100 ding ding more to expect, and then everybody will be there. So as Dr. Abbey's explained, when somebody is promoted, it's my role to write a letter, and you have a 7-page letter in here. And if I read it, it would probably take 20 minutes of the lecture, but we are going to spend 5 or 6 minutes, and I'm going to read you a kind of summary of the letter that was written by the department after a full review of Dr. Fung promotion dossier to the dean, and for the basis of the promotion. So it started, and then I assume, by the way, that a lot of things I will mention, then Dr. Fung Professor Fung during his lecture will touch and tell us way more about. But so as a kind of summary, it starts in 1991, where Dr. Fung completed his undergrad studies, and then followed in 1995 by his medical degree, and then in 2000, his training in psychiatry, and then a clinical research fellowship with culture, community, and health study in 2002, a Master of Science in 2003, and then a Rotman Leadership Development Program in 2014. So you see 22-year formal training, and all of it from undergrad to the leadership development at the University of Toronto, which is a rare accomplishment that you managed to do everything from A to Z at University of Toronto. And then it is followed the training by an assistant professorship in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Toronto in 2002, and then a promotion from associate professor in 2012. And then 10 years later, this is the promotion we're talking about. In addition, Dr. Fung was appointed as the director of the Global Mental Health in the Department of Psychiatry in 2021. He joined University Health Network in 2002, and he has been a staff psychiatrist and the founding and clinical director of the Asian Initiative in Mental Health. And in his role, he served as a psychiatric consultant to Hong Fook Mental Health Association, Montreal Scarborough Long-Term Care Center, and a liaison to Chinese Interagency Network, Chinese Mental Health Network, and the West Toronto Chinese Community Network. And as I said, I'm now going to skip one entire page because I believe we'll hear more about all this work during the lecture. So Dr. Fung was promoted on the basis of what we call at the University of Toronto is creative professional activities, or CPA, and the excellence of this. And Professor Fung articulated his CPA vision as, open quote, to promote the mental well-being of all community based on the values of equity, diversity, and inclusion through engagement, compassion, and empowerment. And his CPA dossier and curriculum vitae attest to the accomplishment of this vision. And he articulated his CPA accomplishment under 3 different categories of professional innovation and creative excellence, number 1, contributions to development of professional practice, number 2, and exemplary professional practice, number 3. And again, I'm going to give you a summary of in each of those categories of accomplishment. So starting with professional innovation and creative excellence, Professor Fung developed innovative way of promoting individual and collective empowerment, resilience through adaptation of the acceptance and commitment therapy ACT model. His work is based on the principle of cultural psychiatry, social justice, and empowerment education. And he mentioned when we heard those ding-ding as the mindfulness bell, ACT is actually an evidence and mindfulness-based psychological intervention congruent with and influenced by Eastern philosophy. And Professor Fung focused on group-based implementation of novel activities to facilitate personal and social cultural reflection. Highlight of this work were first, what he called ACT for Stigma Reduction and Mental Health Promotion, which that work was funded with $6 million in competitive national funding, mostly from CHR, and resulted in 13 peer-reviewed articles, 1 book chapter, and 4 manuals, including 1 in Chinese. Another CP activity related to ACT was what he called ACT for caregivers of children with disability, linked to nearly $700,000 in as PI and co-PI funding, and then additional peer-reviewed article. Another one was called ACT for coping with adversities in vulnerable population using technology, including migrant caregiver and healthcare professional responding to pandemic, and including online therapy program and several publications. One more, ACT theory, philosophy, and Asian roots, leading to 1 peer-reviewed publication, 3 book chapter, and then 2 clause. ACT for clinical population from diverse communities, leading to an intervention manual published in English and translated in Korean. Dr. Fung provided extensive training in ACT, including workshops, symposia, locally and across Canada, in Northern community to train Indigenous mental health workers, and throughout East Asia, the UK, and the United States, all with high rating. And again, I expect that we'll hear a lot about this work during the lecture. Moving to the second category of CPA, the contribution of the development of professional practice, I will just mention a few roles that Dr. Fung has had, where he had the opportunity to elevate cultural competence, again, regionally, nationally, internationally. He has been the president of the Society for the Study of Psychiatry and Culture, SSPC, and the president of the Transcultural Psychiatry section of the Canadian Psychiatric Association. He has been co-creator of MindFest, which has become the signature annual U of T Department of Psychiatry psychoeducation event, reaching over 500 participants, and which is going to take place in a few weeks. When is it? There will be a slide on it. So you will hear about it, and you will all have the opportunity to attend MindFest. You can take a picture, and it's both online and in person. He has been the co-lead of one of the strategic direction in the previous strategic planning of the Department of Psychiatry, what was called Pillar 4 Dialogue, and in this role he championed many new EDI-related initiatives. And again, I'm sure we'll hear a lot about this. And then his third category of CPA was exemplary professional practice. Just for you who are not aware of all the arcane way you get promoted or not promoted, you need one of those. So you can see that he did way more than what was needed. And under exemplary professional practice, Dr. Fung promoted ethno-specific and other culturally competent models of care, bridging academic institution and community agency through collaborative initiative, including the biennial Diversity and Equity Conference, which is an international conference, delivered 42 public community talks and 44 media talk in English and Chinese. And then again, have evidence of the international impact and all this work. Dr. Fung has been a member, and I mentioned, and the president of the Society for the Study of Psychiatry and Culture, a board member of the World Association for Cultural Psychiatry, and he has given 43 invited international presentations and 59 other international presentation workshops and courses. His research is really related to his CPA and has resulted in 18 peer-reviewed grants, 1 SPI, 7 SCOPI, 10 SCOI, for a total funding of 11 million since 2012, since the last promotion over the 10 years, not over a lifetime, and including 8.5 million SPI or COPI, and that have included the Canadian Institute of Health Research and the Public Health Agency of Canada. And I think we'll all agree that this funding record confirmed Dr. Fung's reputation as an independent researcher, but also as a sought-after collaborator. The accolade he received, he has published 34 peer-reviewed articles, and some of the accolades he has received that led to his promotion. He's a distinguished fellow of the Canadian Psychiatric Association since 2020. He became a fellow of the Association of Contextual Behavioral Science in 2019. He received the People's Choice Award for Global Alliance for Chronic Disease annual meeting. In 2018, he received a Canada 150 medal in 2018, award for advancing minority mental health from the American Psychiatric Association Foundation in 2017, and he became a fellow of the American Psychiatric Association in 2015. And he also received the Social Responsibility Award from the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto in 2015. We ask some external people who have not collaborated with Dr. Fung to give us their opinion of his work, and they give us long letter that then are quoted in this document. I'm just going to give you 3 quotes from 3 different people. One of his external, and the external reviewer are all professor in outside international institution, very prominent, and I cannot tell you who they are because they remain Dr. Fung will never know who are those people who supported, and he's not supposed to know unless he's kind of trying to look on my paper to see her name. So I'm reading the quote verbatim. Internationally, Dr. Fung is well known for at least three important qualities. Number one, he knows how to give high quality lecture in a way that keeps everyone attention. We're going to see if it's true or not shortly. His skills are highly appreciated. Number two, his publication about his research that form a very valuable asset to our field of cultural psychiatry, since he uses widely accepted research method and enriches our field with relevant empirical data and innovative creative research topic. Number three is extraordinary nice personality and attentive social skill, which gives him a lot of credit and respect and lead to a lot of requests to chair organization, conference, and scientific meeting. Those of you who came here to be in person will have the opportunity to see his extraordinary nice personality and social skill during the reception. Those of you online, you will just need to watch and be envious of us who are in the room. So another person said he has achieved standing and stature that place him among the leader of cultural and academic psychiatry, and with a clear promise of more to come. I'm going to do the entire page 6 on teaching and education, otherwise Dr. Fung will have no time to speak, but I'm going to give you 2 quotes from his student. We request quote from student, and 7 of his students send letter of support. And I'm just going to give you 2 sentences from 2 different students. One said, but if I have to choose one thing that I appreciated over years in my experience with him as a supervisor, it would be his amazing support and encouragement. And I wish every student would send that from every supervisor. Another said, Dr. Fung has been an influential mentor, educator, and clinician in the field of cultural psychiatry, with significant impact on the development of my critical thinking skill and success with creative professional activity in his subject area. And I will finish with a quote from the 3rd external reviewer, who concluded their letter saying, in view of what he has already achieved, which also include a remarkable body of currently funded research, it is timely and appropriate to acknowledge his accomplishment to date that make Professor Fung promotion both well justified and highly recommended. And I'm very happy that everybody at the University of Toronto agreed, and I will ask you to formally welcome Professor Fung.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Mozan, and thank you all for being here. And thank you to my almost 200 participants online. Thank you so much for coming. I'm really humbled to hear all that, and it's really touching. I feel like that I should almost like call it quits now, and leave it on a good note. But so sincerely, I just want to thank everyone for being here, and I guess it's my duty to also entertain you a little bit. Over the next 45 minutes or so, I will share with you a little bit about the work I've done and the passion I have for these topics. So perhaps I will begin with like the title, Culture, Communities, and Mental Health. So you can hear the theme of culture. It's something that I'm passionate about. And where there's culture, there's a community that has the culture. And where there's a community, there's culture. So to me, those things are really linked. So when we talk about culture, and when we talk about culture, it's Chinese culture, Canadian culture, and other ethnic cultures, but also many kinds of culture, like the mental health culture. There's the Zoom culture of what you do and what you don't do in Zoom. And if you violate those cultural rules, there could be potentially, it can be viral if you violate certain cultural rules. So I think culture it has a lot to do with the community and each other, and they both have to do with health. So I think these areas are interlinked, and I hope to share with you then a little bit about my perspective on that. And then the perhaps more attractive tagline, which is everyone, everywhere, all at once. Stay in the microphone. Yeah, I think this is a pretty good mic. Is it okay? So obviously that sounds familiar, I hope, from the award-winning, Oscar award-winning, and many awards. And I think that in addition to, it's the reason why you're here, that I chose this because I think it does reflect a lot about what I would talk about too. There is an aspect of being a Chinese or North American Chinese experience that's obviously portrayed in a movie that I will share with you. So this is not the Chinese Canadian story, but it's a Chinese Canadian story. So there's part of it. The movie is also about different multiverse. By the way, no spoilers. And so watching movies is also not required to attend this talk or to understand this talk. But the movie talks about that concept of multiverse and different aspects of ourselves that may be latent. And we can think about that as perhaps different cultural influences that we are aware of, but we may not be aware of. That's also part of us. So as a culture psychiatrist, there's a lot to think about there. And then as an act therapist or a clinician, the movie is also about looking at trying to find meaning and how everything is interconnected. So I think I'll also touch on that kind of finding of meaning. And one of the premises of the movie is every single decision you make can have a lot of ramifications and consequences for the good or for the bad. So that is actually very empowering, exciting to think that every new choice you make can lead to many different great things. And sometimes in the face of that, we can feel like, oh, maybe nothing matters or we can't control things. Or again, we can find meaning that's guided by values. And through the movie, the connection of love. Sounds a little hokey, but my talk is about love and connection. So I hope that by the end of the talk, you'll agree that maybe that's what holds us together and holds the universe together. And you'll see if that occurs. As Benoit gives me a challenge, maybe I'm not a good presenter. You didn't say that. And I'd like to just begin with a land acknowledgement. So with gratitude and respect, I acknowledge that I'm presenting from Bakaranto, the traditional land of many First Nations, and continues to be the home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And each time I acknowledge the traditional land taken from Indigenous peoples, it is a reminder for me to reflect on my relationships with Indigenous peoples, my commitment to protecting the environment, and my action in solidarity to dismantle the ongoing colonialism, racism, structural violence, and other forms of social injustices that disproportionately impact on Indigenous, Black, and racialized communities in Canada and across the globe. Okay, so to begin with my presentation, and in line with Chinese culture, I would just like to, because being a professor makes me think of teacher, and I thought maybe it's a really important thing for me to first honor some of the teachers, because I think being a professor, being a teacher, you wear many hats. Maybe a math scientist is one of them, but another one is being a teacher. So I just want to honor like my teachers throughout from the department who has really influenced me and gave birth to what I'm saying. So if you don't like it, you can see who my teachers are. But and they are sort of in the order of when I've encountered them in my residency and even as a medical student, and all of them. And I can spend 45 minutes, actually much more, on each individual, how they've impacted on me and kind of shaped where I'm going. So I want to first honor and give thanks to them. Many of them are in this room and some of them are online. So I'm really honored and I want to just begin by thanking them. And now about why I also enter in culture, and actually I was supervised by many of my supervisors to encourage me to develop this area. And I can tell different stories, but maybe one story I could tell is kind of the story of water, because water is where we come from, but about boiling water. So when I was a PGY2 and just on an inpatient rotation, our team have been doing team rounds, and one of the patients on the ward is an Asian man with eating disorder. Now, eating disorder you commonly associate with women, so that's kind of rare. And so that becomes a particular interest on the ward. And when you have a man with an eating disorder from Asian background that nobody quite understands about psychopathology, I think a lot of us in the room might potentially think, oh, must be personality disorder. Or at least that's the feeling then. And one day in the rounds, so the nurse was saying, this is a patient acting out again because of his entitlement. Because he was demanding he refused to drink water, which is kind of the common thing with a straw and ice. So he wanted boiled but cool water. Now, Asians in the room would say, well, boiled but cool water sounds like it makes sense. But to the nurses, this is a clear illustration of the entitlement, the borderline, the splitting of the staff demanding for this, right? So kind of mentioned it on the rounds that, well, when you're from Asian culture, asking for boiled cool water may be okay. I don't think that remark was taken very well in the year-end evaluation. I was a good resident, and I was talking to the supervisor, and he said I have a tendency to collude with my patients, with the psychopathology, and that wasn't really helpful. So this is just kind of one of various incidents that kind of make me think and reflect on the importance of culture. It could be a small thing, and yet how it can alter and challenge and change the way we perceive the things. And as clinicians, as mental health care providers, as this kind of relationship building between people providing care and people receiving care. So this has started me, one of the inspiring stories that I've carried around with me about boiling water. And so I was also reflecting on why am I a cultural psychiatrist? And perhaps it does have to do with the fact that I was I grew up in Hong Kong. This is kind of the place where I grew up, try to find dated photos in my old school. So it's kind of, when you look at this, you might feel exotic, or you might feel this is home, right? So this is kind of the perspective taking, kind of grew up there. Looks like I'm having a fabulous time, not made by my parents at all to go there to enjoy the brand new ocean park back then in Hong Kong. But there I was. And as I was a kid, the kind of culture that I was exposed to, these are some of my favorite songs. There's my Harley Davidson and my sixth string. But this is like the pop songs of the day. And maybe it's a foreshadowing about mindfulness, acceptance, and self as context. These are terms that I'll come back to in ACT. But yeah, as a child, I was basically singing about life, the meaning of life, how we have to accept things, and who we are as human beings. Yeah, that's my kindergarten education. And also, I was influenced by a teacher, my art teacher, and she was almost like a babysitter because I was there so often. I exceeded all classes. I was just kind of a permanent fixture in her studio. And I was doing both Western art and Chinese art because she would teach both. And she would talk about the importance of Chinese language and pronouncing proper Cantonese and writing in the proper style, both the beauty of Western painting, but also Chinese brushstroke painting. I've mastered none of those things, but I had a fabulous time. But I think those influences, and growing up at that time in Hong Kong where I didn't recognize it, but there's a real confluence of Western and Eastern culture that's really mixed. It's really an exciting time. And then I came here. I was grade 7 when I came to Toronto. And this can be another part of my life. It started with like a sitcom, fresh off the boat or something. It's my family right there. So this is the typical immigrant story. We came here with my parents. So I'm mom and dad on the online. So we were living with my uncle and aunt before my parents can establish their own home. So we've become really close with my uncle and aunt and my cousins there, and there's my brother. My father has left a real good job in the government in Hong Kong and to come here and as an occupation hygienist. And my mother is a nurse who see firsthand what it's like, the challenge of getting requalification and exams and not making it quite and having to try it again, the frustration and the Canadian winter. And for me, it was also a time of trying to learn Chinese. No, sorry, I knew Chinese, but I was trying to learn English. I knew it was one of those languages I was trying to learn. So I was trying to learn English in school. And I was somewhat confused, but trying very hard to learn English. I remember there was time here that I was trying to assimilate as quickly as possible. Effectively, I was trying to be as white as quickly as possible, if that was a thing, because I knew it's hard to communicate. I spoke with a heavy accent. People couldn't really understand me, etc. I spoke with because we were raised in kind of British system. It confused the heck out of me when people would say, you can't do that, but we say I can't in Hong Kong, which is a very clear distinction. So I keep on doing all the things that you can't do, thinking, say, you go ahead and do it. So there was some confusion to try to do that. And in my forming of my cultural identity, I met some friends in high school, best buds, who were called the Three Musketeers. And we always hang out. And that helped me actually reconnect, I guess, more with the Chinese identity in a way. Because I went from telling my parents, don't ever speak to me in Chinese again at home, because I need to learn English, to chasing after my parents and say, how do you read this word in Chinese, reading Chinese novels with my friends? And how do you sing the song? Because you have to sing karaoke. And my parents would say, why are you wasting time on Chinese novels? Go back to study your Shakespeare. So, but it is this kind of cultural identity journey maybe can be identifiable to people growing up here, that you go through a period where you want to blend in, you face racism at school, you're called names, my last name was a joke for many people, that kind of thing, and you really try to just fit in, to kind of integrating this kind of Chinese identity and being a Chinese Canadian. So, and there are lots of written about this from cultural psychiatry literature of different ethnic races for Black. Actually, some of the first series come from Black children wanting or thinking that they are white, the Hispanics and Asians, etc. So I think that more can be done. So I've introduced some reading like this for residents to learn, because I don't think it's something I learned as a resident, because we learn about normal psychological development, but it's not quite cultural identity development. So some residents love it so far, some residents thought, is it truly relevant? So far, the feedback. So we'll have to work on that a little bit. And along with that, I start to also join like a voluntary organization. Again, St. John Ambulance Brigade is kind of a voluntary organization where we provide first aid. It's one of the only, I guess, Chinese division. And through it, I see that we serve both the Chinese and the Canadian community, because we'd be assigned duties to CNEs and regular Canadian events. Our heart always stops when we get assigned Taekwondo karate tournament, because we have lots of business as a first aider, unwanted business sometimes. But we also would go to duties in Chinese New Year events. And in a similar way, we were sent to give like first aid talk, how do you stop bleeding, to both mainstream organization, but also to serve the Chinese community. So it's really seeing how being a Chinese Canadian, you really can serve both communities. It doesn't have to be a choice. And there can be an integration of that. And after being a doctor, I've had the privilege of then working across disciplines of other Chinese professionals, being the president and dialoguing with engineers and accountants and really amazing people, and also the Chinese Canadian Medical Society. Both were formed in an era in kind of protest, because there was a thought that there were just too many Chinese doctors and professionals, and they're taking over the university and taking up Canadian resources. So this was the atmosphere through which these organizations were formed. Through my work there, I also met friends throughout the US. Okay. Making friends everywhere, apparently. So, the Federation of Chinese American, Chinese Canadian Medical Societies, which have the similar organizations throughout the US and the Federation. And certainly, every 2 years, we come together across disciplines looking at how do we improve the care of the Chinese in North America. And with the FCCP Education Foundation, of which I continue to be a trustee, we continue to give out scholarships everywhere to all post-secondary education with regardless of ethnicity. So again, many actually most of the awards are non-Chinese by just statistics. And then they get to understand that, again, we serve both the Chinese and the greater community. So is there a need for mental health for Chinese? And I think that the answer is yes. If we look at the fact that more than 1 in 10 individuals speak a non-English or French native speaker at home, we know that the importance of language and being able to serve, having special service, just like we described, having mainstream services good, and also having care to ensure access is important for the Chinese, which has a huge population. And do we know that they need the care? Well, some data from the Ontario population-based data, looking at all people who were hospitalized in Ontario during a period, and you can see that actually the Chinese, unlike perhaps some of the stereotypes, they're actually sicker by the time when they're admitted to hospital. And this is likely because they don't come to care early. And you can see that among different ethnic groups, they actually have the lowest sense of belonging among different ethnic groups. And this can include people, Chinese here who are born here, that they can feel still like an outsider. And they have one of the lowest self-rated mental health among ethnic groups. And yet at the same time, they're least likely to be diagnosed. Okay. So we can see that, and this is actually replicated in a lot of different studies, that Asian populations tend to be underdiagnosed and underserved. Okay. I think the host mute everyone, and including me, but now I'm unmute. Okay. So at the Toronto Western and UHN, we're one family. So we have the Asian Initiative in Mental Health. It's been there since I've been there. So, and there are different components of serving the Chinese Canadian community, Cantonese and Mandarin speaking. There's an early intervention component. And we are actually proud to also have a unique group program of Journey to Healing, which includes both Western and so also Chinese concepts of how do you stay healthy as a psychoeducational program. And also IBGT, which is unique in blending both cognitive behavioral therapy and ACT. And we are having this program for both the Chinese as well as the Portuguese, because we're like brothers. 唔該你肅靜啊，我哋全世界都聽到你。Except I don't think that person can hear me either. So, and we actually also collect statistics, and both programs every year has statistical improvement in our provision of care. So when we talk about culturally competent care beyond language, what is culture? So I'll just invite you to do a quick projective testing with me. Here you see, in case you don't know, it's a cow and a chicken and a patch of grass. So in your mind, which two are most like a pair? So you can make a mental note quickly. And again, you might have different conceptions, right? So it turns out that if you do this kind of testing over and over again, people come to either cow and grass coming together, or some people might say the chicken and cow because they're both animals. And this, of course, not just based on one picture, but based on different and multiple testings, you can see that different ways of conceiving and making relationships. If you see cow and chicken coming together, it is really because we are learning through knowledge and categorization. And this is a very typical, the more Western educated you are, the more likely you're gonna have what we call rule-based kind of categorization. Whereas if you look at cow and grass, it's a more relational or contextual. And it turns out that if you do this kind of testing again over many questions, that the Asian kind of mind tends to go towards contextual and relational. But for the Western mind, it tends to be more rule-based and knowledge-based. So fundamentally, our psychology can be a little bit different. So Joseph Enrique has written about this, that the vast majority of how we assume psychology works in basic psychological literature, it's all based on weird people, which does not reflect most of the world's population, Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic societies. So that if you really look at psychology like this, from what is good attachment theory, to how do we categorize things, how do we solve problems, there are cultural differences. And we can also see differences in the brain too, right? It's represented in the brain. So fMRI differences between how Chinese Americans think themselves and their mother are very close together, whereas in American, they can be seen as kind of relating to another person. And a meta-analysis in 2014, looking at many different of these fMRIs and functional MRIs imaging, came to the conclusion that in social interactions for East Asians, the parts of the brain that light up more is really trying to look at the nuances of what the other person is feeling right now. Whereas for Western population, the parts that light up relatively more comparatively is the parts that's about how you're yourself feeling. So you're in touch with your feelings. So we always talk about the importance of being in touch with feelings in psychotherapy. Maybe the patients are trying to read us more than being very much in touch with their own feelings. So you can see that in brain differences. And what about for the everyday psychiatrists? Well, we know that there are medications differences too. So for example, we know that most medications are aiming for the 70-kilogram white male. But due to genetic polymorphism, our liver processes medications differently. And it can be up to 100% plasma differences because of cytochrome P450 genetic polymorphism. So these are the things that, as a practical everyday psychiatrist, it might be important to think about too. And one way to perhaps get around that is to do more genetics type of research. But one interesting thing is, as people are trying to have more personalized medicine and look at how genes predict response, for example, looking at the polymorphism of the promoter region of the serotonin transporter gene, it's always thought that the L allele connotes a better response to antidepressants for depression and also other illness. But that's because people are not looking at Asian data, which completely does not have that. So here is an example where in research, if we think of other ethnicities as noise, our science of what we discover may be limiting, even in methodology. So pharmacogenomics, looking at the bigger picture of all how genes interact, would be needed. And there are similar studies on Black populations that Black and white Americans react differently to medications, even if you look at the what genes predict good and bad response. So, by the way, I have so many little circles, are all my collaborators and teachers, and every time you see a circle, please assume that that person is just amazing, and I have learned so much from them. It's an honor to really be able to learn from each of these circles that you see. So we really feel the need to promote the importance of cultural psychiatry as it's into just regular training, that it's not kind of a nice icing on the cake, to learn a little bit about cultural psychiatry, but that it can be from the way we think to how we give psychotherapy to how we treat patients or how we do research. How do we take EDI or cultural differences into account? So that when, as a therapist, as a practitioner, we're sitting in a room with another client or patient, that we're aware of our own cultural identities and our worldviews and how we're bringing two worlds together, where there are overlap for sure, where there are also the need to bridge that understanding. And of course, we are all embedded because we talk about communities, the importance of community. When you have two people interacting, it's not just two people interacting, we are bringing our two communities together. And so at a systemic level, we also need to talk about cultural competence, both in an individual level, but also at an organizational level. To look at how whole organizations, from a clinic to a hospital, to other types of institution, where there are processes that enable effective cross-cultural encounter. By the way, the concept of cultural competence can itself be controversial because most of the time people misunderstand what cultural competence means. People tend to think cultural competence means you're claiming expert to someone's culture, which it definitely is not. Because I don't even claim culture competence for being Chinese. There's so many to Chinese culture. I have miles to learn before I claim any kind of expertise. So cultural competence isn't about that. It is about, competence is about good enough, right? Whether you pass an exam. So it's about good enough to not do harm and to be of some help to the person in front of you by being aware of cultural differences and trying to work through it. So to me, that's what cultural competence is. And I know that sometimes we want to use cultural humility, which is wonderful. Although I always say, would you rather see a humble dentist or competent dentist? I think we would, have a right to demand for competent dentists. So I feel that psychiatrists ought to be not to be too afraid to say, I need to have some adequacy in looking at these cultural issues, to have that cultural competency. So as Dr. Musan has said, one of the ways to systemically move organization towards more cultural competence and to look at these diversity EDI issues, our department in its history was the Pillar for Dialogue, which is one of our previous strategic plan that I had the fortune of co-leading with Lisa Anderman. And each of these bubbles are amazing people, as I said. We're supported really by the leadership and also by Molen, Dr. Molen Lesh. And dialogue at the time was given to us as this is strategic direction. And so we all came together and defined what we meant by dialogue of the department with the outer world. And these are the things that we care about, which is to promote social justice. And in doing so, wow, lots more bubbles appear because our department is full of amazing leaders that collectively, as a Pillar 4, we were supporting each other in furthering the work in all these different areas that you see here, and looking at issues of EDI and promoting social justice. And many became new initiatives that continue to last, like the annual Muslim Mental Health Conference, that's Canadian now, that's every year, and it continues. We've done a lot of amazing work involving consumers in the department. We have done a lot of social justice work in education. So really, it was an amazing time. And the current strategic plan is time, with E being equity that Lisa continues to lead. So this is to show our department cares about social justice and EDI issues, and a lot of the good work continues. And one of the legacy, as Dr. Moza also mentioned, is MindFest. Most thing I'm proud of is, first, I coined the name and copyrighted. But also that it's a way to decrease stigma. I've given hundreds of talks in community about mental health, but we have a huge department and so many experts and so many collaborators we can collaborate with and to do this work. And so the question is, can we involve the department to also do this work? And the answer is yes. And we have so many amazing time. And believe it or not, this is our 10th year of doing that. And so we invite all of you. Here is the date, May 5th. And you can go to mindfest.ca to see what it is. That we really want to engage the public in learning more about mental health. Each year we get over 500 participants, a lot from high schools, and it's so rewarding to know that it has impacted a lot of young students. We've discovered sometimes just by accident how they've gone back home and in their school newsletter write something on mental health and about the impact of MindFest. We got like thank you letters from guidance counselors, from teachers who said there's something different about shepherding a group of kids to Heart House, and they're just so impressed, and talking more about mental health. And we have also been the inspiration of startup of at least one ethnic mental health organization just from having booths. And like that NGO just kind of sprang up because they were inspired by this movement. And so taking this into outside the university, on the left is the Cultural Psychiatry Day. And since 2010, we have gone national and collaborating with all the universities now across Canada. We add them one by one. We used to have one extra logo of universities, but it soon became too many to list down below. And this is the upcoming day if you're interested. So each year we target residents to engage in discussion of topics that are core to cultural psychiatry, but perhaps not usually cover across Canada in different universities that might not have the resources. And on the right, it's another grassroots but homegrown, an amazing conference. We use diversity and equity as the name since 2010. It's really spearheaded by Hong Kong Mental Health Association, and as well as UHN, myself. It's kind of like a collaboration. And this is unique in bringing together academics and academic hospitals in cooperation with community organizations. And that's kind of what is unique about this conference, that will have frontline workers dialoguing with academics on EDI issues. Internationally, also can invite you to the conference as the immediate past president of SSPC, that we have tried to, again, promote cultural psychiatry internationally. You heard my work with the SSPC, and my friends, I think some of the Netherlands people are just waking up or going to bed online. My friends from WACP, and really indebted to them that we work collectively together to promote cultural psychiatry internationally. Shout out to all my amazing colleagues. Coming back to a little bit about research, I started my journey learning from the best. You can see the amazing bubbles there, Renita and Josephine. And, you know, as our first project, we decided to be modest. So we recruited 1,000 women from Southeast Asian women in Ontario through the support of Hong Kong to really examine the explanatory models of illness, which in cultural psychiatry look at the fact that people have different perceptions of their mental health and well-being. And we were not only doing that, but also an empowering program of empowering women to become mental health ambassadors. So the community-based action research is about both researching, but also giving back at the same time through the project. And I learned so much being an honorary third woman in this Women's Mental Health Project funded by Ontario Women's Health Council. There's nothing more humbling to join a team as a new junior young person on a women's project. Highly recommended learning experience. And to empower people, this is where I also talk about ACT. So I was deliberately, as I was trained and I still teach CBD, and cognitive behavior therapy is an amazing therapy, but I also felt that something is missing. So the acceptance and commitment therapy has become something I've fallen in love with. And maybe I'll just explain to you, for those of you who are not familiar with these hand gestures. So perhaps if you can just close your hands together. This is the experiential part. It's all about experiential with ACT. If you just even press a little harder too, you can feel a little bit of pressure. And that is just the state of life. We can have a bit of pressure, maybe against negative thoughts and feelings. But one of the things we can do is just allow it to gently come apart. Let's give some distance, not necessarily changing the thought. Like we don't have to argue back through logic. We can open up to some acceptance. And then we can ground ourselves to the center, not too much in the past or the future, find the center point. And from there, if you are a fist and a cup, would you rather be the fist or the cup? Would you rather be the coffee inside, which gets old, or the cup that is ready for a fresh cup? And how we can transcend our stories. And if we cup our hands, if we're in the desert, then what do you not want to let slip through your fingers if there was a drop of water? So what are your values that you care about? If you really know what your values are in this moment, what's action you can take like in a committed way? So that's a committed action. So this is how I've learned, this is not how I've learned ACT, but I've learned ACT in the traditional way. And this is how I now teach ACT in a somewhat experiential way to step through some of these psychological processes. And you can see it gives a nice complement to our usual, perhaps CPT methods of examining a thought for as rationality, because it's more about function. And with ACT, I also take it into different contexts, and you can see in different contexts, in different communities, it can also change how people may use the same exercise and the cultural nuances that and the kind of issues that people face challenges with. And with Alison, we've gone to 11 different indigenous communities, and it's really been a pleasure to learn from her. Coming back to ACT, I think that I've been so blessed to have learned a little bit from Thich Nhat Hanh. Whatever I say in 45 minutes, he can say in 5 minutes. The thing is that ACT at its core, many people think it has a lot of overlap with Buddhism. And indeed, we can look at the influence of mindfulness and its origin. And in fact, sometimes the danger of learning just mindfulness as a personalized skill, it becomes a personalized skill. And when you look deeper into the philosophy of Buddhism, it is actually more about connections and interconnections, even though we have this picture of, going off place in the Zen by yourself and mastering a skill. But it's about looking at seeing through the artificial divides and silos. So I have the pleasure through Hong Fook of collaborating with holy monks for the Cambodian community, and also working with the Buddhist Education Foundation to actually we just taught a course on ACT and Buddhism and its relationships. And I think that the development of ACT can have a lot to learn from Buddhism and continue to learn from amazing bubbles and to collaborate with my brother in ACT is Matthias when we first launched into it. We have used ACT and combining it with social justice for, in this particular project, it's an HIV stigma. So for people living with HIV from the minoritized community, including the Black, the Hispanic, the Asian communities, but also people without HIV. And what we find is that the intervention can decrease stigma, but also empower them to decrease stigma as a champion. So the idea that each action can lead to more action, we capture through activity logs the different spheres of influence, because each of you have your own sphere of influence. And we can influence people in so many different levels, that kind of ripple effect. And we can capture through just training 66 people through it, we've collected within the scope of the study 1,090 acts of anti-stigma. And so this is the power of also community building that we've really learned from it. And I can show you more data then about how we next take it to Strength and Unity study, which is tackling Asian mental health stigma, especially men. So people say you can get 1,000 women that come out, but can you get men? And so, and it is challenging. But this was a $3 million multi-site study, and we got thousands of men coming out. And I can show you similar graphs statistically. But what's really heartening is what some of these inspired men do on their own, like having a party to decrease stigma, or a person writing a book you can find on Amazon, documenting his own abuse, but also himself as an abuser, and domestic violence, and recognizing it, and also recognizing the depression and abuse and confessing about it. Takes a lot of courage, and also anti-stigma things. So these are not scripted, and it's these unscripted things that to me are so inspiring. And now we also have an ongoing project with China with 6 different universities in doing implementation science research, in which we want to use this model to increase university student mental health. And you can see that our master therapist, Li Fan, from our hospital, we ship her there as the kind of one of our world experts to help with this program. And through this RE-AIM framework is one way of really studying the implementation process in global health research, the necessary global kind of and cultural adaptation. Now, and then things can happen to you that would influence you in different ways. So one of the chaotic forces in my life that happens to me is my son. This is there. You can really challenge your balance. His name is William, and he didn't walk and talk much until age 3, so delayed. But once he learned to walk and talk, he didn't want to stop doing either. So he's bouncing all around, talking nonstop. And yeah, because he actually has autism spectrum disorder plus ADHD. I had my doubts about ADHD. I thought it was just, a psychiatric made-up diagnosis. But I swear that the ADHD DSM criteria was written for him. And he's unstoppable. And so he's has a particular knowledge about the 1960s. He's watched every single Leave It to Beaver episode, that's before my time, and knows all the 1960s songs, 1950s, how they chart. And he got an award for trying to convert the whole school to listen to 1960 songs because he kept sending email to the teachers and saying, hey, remember those times? And they actually gave him an award for it. Talk about encouragement of interesting behavior. And he tried to have the prom only play 1960s music. And this is him, my picture of him to go off to university, because now he wants to be a teacher at York University. He says in his letter of application, I've been interested in children for a very long time. I said, you just might want to modify that a little bit. It may not be perceived so well by educators. But because of that, having lived experience of being a parent of children with autism, began working with amazing folks here. And this particular funding, it's for mothers. So kind of gender-based research here. But we can see the use of ACT really decrease mother's stress. And what's interesting too is we look at the value behaviors in different domains. We can see that the lowest scoring is self-care. And we effectively doubled their self-care, but not at the expense of parenting. It actually went up. So mothers report when they take better care of themselves, they have that extra 2,000% patience you need to help a child with autism. And so now we have this program where we're training across Canada, pairing mothers with children with autism with clinicians so that they can co-deliver. It's always co-deliver. We train them to be co-delivered in this model to other caregivers. And with this model, it really shows not only what we're delivering, but who are delivering it. That helps so much. And we've also had experience with the FASD community as well. So we are continuing this work with the amazing bubbles that you see there. So that was one kind of circumstance that can alter and shape someone's career interest. Another one is this little virus COVID that I think we all kind of know what this story is. Of course, it affects communities in a very different way too, because I can talk about so many things about the impact of COVID, but it also affects minoritized communities differently, and especially the Chinese communities had a lot of racism, and it's like 200% extra or something. So I want to give kudos to people who really come together. I talked about how I've experienced racism as a kid. It was just the Canadian experience to experience, you know, most people just experience it. And being the model minority, I think most Asians feel like it's not their place to complain. Of course, this myth of model minority concept falls apart. We call it myth because it's not, when you critically look at it, it's not true. But award-winning filmmaker, we have it in the room, has made this film, and I was happy to be part of that. So there was a concerted effort to really give a bit more voice, because I've been giving dozens, hundreds actually, of invited talks on cultural psychiatry, but almost never once on racism until the pandemic. Then I got lots of invites. Suddenly people are talking about racism, and I get invited to government agency, and then all the Asian people just start coming out and sharing their experiences that they just thought that there was never a voice given to. And with that in mind, also in dealing with the pandemic, we had a pandemic response with my amazing colleagues, and we have this act in the middle, but also surrounded by, you can see in a large model we call acceptance, commitment, empowerment, that really look at social justice issue. The question to us is, as we're caring for people, and there's all these social injustice, not only the Chinese, but also the homeless and also the minoritized population not getting vaccines. And sometimes you have those two as separate things, right? Go off and do mindfulness on your own, and then now go also care about EDI seminar, right? So can we bring those two worlds together? And I want to also show you, because this is an online thing, of some of these exercises highly adapted for this talk. But for example, what we want to do is expand both individual and collective psychological flexibility. By this time in the talk is a little bit on. If I were to ask you, who are you? And ask you just to pick one word, which word would you gravitate to? And you might make a mental note of that. By the way, there's no right or wrong answer. Even though I'm a professor, I'm not marking this. But just notice the process of how you might pick a word and what has guided you to that. It's looking at who you are. And then in a related question is, who is a part of your community? We asked about you, and then now your community. Which person would you pick as your community? So again, because of the purpose of this talk, we don't have like an hour to debrief, but in this interactive module, we want to bring ACT and mindfulness and EDI, not in a teaching kind of way, but in a reflective, experiential kind of way, that when you're engaging in this exercise, that people are invited to reflect on who you are and who your community is. This is one small, tiny example of a 6-week module of different kinds of learning, and we can see the results. We have reached about 300 people. Half of them are healthcare providers of all different kinds. And the other half is from the mainly Chinese community, because we're funded by 2 sources of funding, both by the hospital. So this is for any healthcare provider of all ethnicity, and for the Chinese community. And you can see through this intervention, people's stress level decrease, their psychological inflexibility decrease, but also their resilience and their empowerment and their caring for social justice issues have increased. So rather than talking about these as two separate things, you go EDI training over here to the left, mindfulness training to the right for yourself. We're bringing those two words together, and they need to be together. So the last couple of slides, just kind of ahead, looking at the future. I think from a behavioral standpoint, from the ACPS kind of standpoint, we feel that all future kind of contextual behavioral science research, including ACT, need to really look at research that's multi-level, process-based, multi-dimensional, pro-social, and pragmatic. That is, just one level lens can be lopsided if we're trying to advance science. And for psychiatrists, for psychiatry, this is just in the Lancet, our group has also looked at why there are different kinds of frameworks, and we really can move towards a cultural eco-social model. And that was more from the behavioral world. This is more from the cognitive science world, from the cognition 4E, of how we can examine cultural social processes as we do better job of mental health care in psychiatry. And one of the other area that I'm excited to be working on is this resilience model as a multi-system model resilience, because we talk about resilience a lot, but our particular model look at, again, both external and internal influences. And we are looking at holistic well-being. So there's going to be an app for that, that we're developing in the background. So we are furiously looking at that. And so just to kind of come back to the talk, do you remember I started with water? So we just finish off kind of coming full circle to boiling water, which is, I often get asked and reminded actually, do you really want to boil the ocean? Because that's impossible. And now, I'm reminded by that a lot, but I think that it's a matter, because Thich Nhat Hanh teaches us that a cloud is in your cup of tea. Really, an ocean is in every drop. How hard is it to boil water, really, right? So it is able to see through the possible in the impossible. And we can look at it from a multiverse point of view. We can look at it from a quantum mechanics point of view. We can notice it from a Buddhist philosophy point of view. And it's to recognize that each of us can have so much impact on the world, because each thing we do can have so much impact. And so, and for good measure, we can look at Rumi, who reminds us that you're not a drop in the ocean, but you're the ocean in a drop. So it's a matter of, let's start boiling the ocean and start recognizing that it is really a talk about everyone and everywhere, and it's all at once in the now. Thank you. I thought that people online could also unmute themselves. Obviously, they were talking.
Sadly not. That was absolutely breathtaking, Kenneth. That was right. We know why he got the professorship, right? And we know he can give a good talk. So I wanted to invite people up who wanted to say something. I was going to start by asking Dr. Gary Roden to come up.
I would say that was one of the most moving and meaningful lectures, let alone professorial lectures, that I've heard Ken. And Ken is the real thing. And I did feel that when I met him almost a couple decades ago, and we had all those conversations about emotional awareness and culture, and what was a cultural difference and what was a bias. And Ken is many things. He's gentle and he's brave. He's intellectually curious and he's determined. And actually, he is trying to boil the ocean, and he is making some progress. That I want to congratulate him on all he's done in the talk today, and I want to congratulate the University Department of Psychiatry for recognizing the accomplishments of Ken Fung, because this kind of attention to mind and to culture and to the interface of mind and culture, which has to do with stigma, it has to do with leaving our professional position in order to understand the whole range of human beings and the people who told you that you were colluding with the patient were right. You were leaving this professional model, and you actually were trying to understand human beings. And of course, we pay a lot of attention to differences, but it is our similarities across cultures that actually bring us all together. Ken Fung is a gem in the world and in the Department of Psychiatry. I'm honored to know you and to be here today. Congratulations, Ken, on all you've done. I look forward to many more things in the future.
It's also recorded.
Hi, everyone. Congratulations, Kenneth, on a really wonderful and comprehensive and almost exhausting in its breadth and scope, because your links with teams really go beyond just our own department and are really out in places that I didn't even know you were doing things, which is totally surprising. And in addition, I think to all of the other compliments to how rigorous and how smart it is to work with Kenneth, is that it's also a lot of fun. And so a lot of the work that we did on strategic plan and things which might sound a little dry also included takeout dinners in his office at the Western, of course, with Chinese food, and being able to kind of plan things out and, you know, take little detours on conferences to go see the girl with the pearl earring. He's got all kinds of artistic and other kind of fun parts to him as well. So congratulations again.
Yes, you have lost the words. Put on the spot. Put on the spot. Put on the spot.
Kenneth, you are one awesome man. It's been a pleasure to be a part of a very, very tiny part of what you have accomplished and the teams you have created. Watching all of that, I wonder if you've actually slept at all. And whether you plan to sleep now that you've achieved this amazing feat of becoming a professor.
I sleep with my eyes open.
Actually, I think you sleep with your hands on the keyboard. You've accomplished so many things. I hope you get to accomplish so many more. And you get to boil a few more drops. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Matthias.
We don't want to put people on the spot. We're almost out of time. Is there anybody else that wanted to say something nice about Kenneth? Come on up, come on up.
Reminding people online they can enter.
Yeah, and people online, please type in your comments. And Josephine. I know Josephine because I went to the Ryerson graduation because my daughter graduated as a nurse, and she said, she is so smart. And I said, she is. She is.
Thank you. Congratulations, Kenneth. And talking about culture, I have the privilege to be on the team when Kenneth was just barely graduating as a young person, and I'm older. So in the Asian culture, when you are older, then you can take on that elder role, even though we were still young then. But nowadays, I can really take on that role. And the other part that Matthias is right, he never sleeps because he'll send me email at 2:00 and say, well, can you read through this? What do you think? And it's always like 2 days before the deadline of any funding proposal. But the other part that Kenneth did not talk about is he's actually very smart in computer technology. And when we got the rapid response grant to actually do something online, because all of us are wearing masks and staying at home, he worked tirelessly and actually turned the training model that we had into online. And if you're good, maybe we'll let some of them to come on board and you realize that you have fun. And I have to say that what really impressed me about Kenneth is he is doing his work research and his counseling, seeing patients with his heart. And I think that's really, really important. So good for you. I'll tell your parents that you're doing good.
It's funny, it's trying to decide who people are.
Thank you. I'll keep this brief. Congratulations, by the way. My name is Calvin Wong. I directed the documentary that Kenneth's within. I will remark that we did a lot of research to qualify whether we would include him, including like police records and things like that to see if he's problematic. Thankfully, he turned out excellent. And the recap today, I think, reminds us of just the volume of expertise. I think the thing that I would most remark on just in my process of having him in this wonderful film was his incredible purpose and his incredible generosity. So I think those are two things that really power not just his ability to navigate and chart new territory and realigning sort of the perspectives in cultural sensitivity with psychiatry, but I think it powers just such a bright, optimistic future. I think that this is just the beginning for you. So that's what I'd like to say. Congratulations, and thank you for recognizing this wonderful dream.
So thank you again, Kenneth. And yeah, I think that you embody the love that you talked about, the love of knowledge, the love of people, the compassion. This has been a fabulous event. I would encourage the folks that are online to quickly type your congratulations to Kenneth if you haven't already. And I would encourage those of you who are here to get one of the yummy cupcakes before you, it's a pathetic compared to what we usually do, but Kenneth was excited when he saw, oh, there's cupcakes. Yeah, that was the best we could do in the COVID times. And I'd encourage people, we can open the doors and walk, into the hallway and visit a little bit. I want to thank Benoit, Professor Malsant, for coming over tonight. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. And mostly I'd like to thank you, Kenneth, for all that you've done for us and for the whole world. So thank you. Thank you.